Hello and welcome. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today at today's LGC AXIO Proficiency Testing webinar. My name is James Sizer. I'm the Global Senior Brand Manager for AXIO Proficiency Testing, and it's my great pleasure today to be introducing two other speakers who I will detail in just a moment. But together we are here today to talk to you about food contact materials, and particularly how you can develop confidence in your testing of food contact materials. One of the key things that we're focusing on is how to maintain pace with what is quite honestly a ever-changing, ever-evolving and ever-developing world of testing, driven by some quite interesting public agenda as well as scientific changes and regulatory conditions. So thank you very much for joining. So just before we get started, I'd just like to mention the possibility that you can ask questions. We will be addressing those questions towards the end of the webinar, should there be time. We will take them offline if not. But to ask a question, please use the questions or chat function in GoToWebinar, and we will tackle them at the end, where we will all do our very best to help you out. Of course, as always, should we cover anything particular of interest, or you would like to continue the conversation afterwards, we would always welcome your contact, whether it's through email, social media, etc. And we'll go into how you can speak to us later on. But in the meantime, I do hope you find today's presentation very interesting. So why are we talking about food contact materials? Well, ultimately, it's because the world's ever-increasing focus on the safe consumption of food is really driving a number of well-established processes in the food supply chain, but also the ability to quickly adapt and amend those processes based on new incoming technologies and areas of food contact materials. So ultimately, we have one big goal, which is around containing any risk associated to chemical contaminants in food productions and supplies. Food contact materials is a significant potential source of contamination, and it is an area that, like I said, is constantly evolving. So what does that include? We're going to go into some examples in a moment, but ultimately, a lot of people will think of food packaging when they think of food contact materials. But ultimately, it can also include any other articles that come into contact with food, whether it's from preparation to consumption. So that it can include the production, the manufacturing, the transport, the packaging, as well as the final method of consumption at the other end of the food supply chain. This means that the sheer scope of this source means that it's a really challenging area of control, and it's something that, funnily enough, we looked at a couple of years ago, and we've already seen a significant amount of changes in that time, and it's going to be interesting to see how it changes in the next couple of years. But this sometimes comes across as a niche topic or a really focused area of scientific investigation and testing. But the reality is that this is one of the broadest scopes of testing that needs to be carried out across the food sector. That kind of breadth and that kind of change and that kind of evolution has led to global regulations and the limits that are being applied to this area being increasingly fragmented. And that means that the move towards quantification testing is becoming a must for laboratories worldwide. And that move in testing is really what brings us to the table today. It is what's pushing this need for reliable, accurate testing in an area of increasing concern and difficult to control. So quality management tools such as proficiency testing and effective use of reference materials, just as two examples, have become extremely essential in this area. So today what we're going to look at is just some of the key challenges that we're seeing in the analytical testing of food contact materials. And then a little bit later on, we'll take a look at how proficiency testing, or PT, can play a really important or critical role in ensuring that your food and beverages are safe for consumption, a quest that we're all in together. Ultimately, though, I'm not the expert. So while I might be bringing some introduction to the table today, I'm very lucky to be joined by my colleagues Valerie Bardin and Savas Zistoris. Valerie is our global product manager at LGC AXIO Proficiency Testing and looks after the portfolio of proficiency testing schemes and samples that we supply to you, the laboratories worldwide, and making sure that we are as up to date as we can be with the changing demands and needs that you may have. And Savas is our technical development manager, and Savas is responsible for the development of our latest and newest proficiency testing samples, particularly in the chemistry space. And Savas really brings to the table some great knowledge around food regulations, changing food testing needs, and much more besides. So we'll be hearing quite a lot more from each of our speakers a little bit later on. So thank you very much to you both for joining today. So just before we get into the really detailed stuff, I just wanted to quickly highlight what we might mean by food contact materials, and particularly why are they important. On screen now, you'll see this idea of from farm to fork, and that's a really popular term, especially in the restaurant trade these days. But ultimately, what we mean by that is that from the very start of a food product's journey in manufacture, through transport, through the serving and preparation, whether that's in public spaces or for private consumption, and of course its packaging. There are a myriad of different ways in which food contact materials can come into contact with your food. Materials used for this vary wildly. We'll come on to some of those in a moment, but that can include plastics, rubber, paper, metal, and more. Really, the safety of these food contact materials is important because the migration of chemicals into food and therefore the human population could be quite serious in terms of exposure from a health perspective, but also from a brand protection perspective. And of course, in the modern world, there's various kind of outbreak risks, but we need to be mindful of. All of that means that materials that come into contact with food obviously have to be manufactured in compliance with regulations, and those might vary wherever the manufacture takes place around the globe. But similarly, its route through these processes could also vary wildly. So we're going to take a look at some of the variations in regulations and challenges a little bit later on. I mentioned then just a few examples of the potential sources of contamination of food contact materials, but some of these again are on screen. So if you look at things like plastic and silicone, paper, cardboard, various different coatings on things like tins or boxes or anything really, cork, glass, wood, metals, ceramics, and increasingly printing inks. So, you know, packaging, and anything else that comes into contact with food can be made of just about anything. And that means that food contact materials as a contamination source is something that is broad, it is highly differentiated based on foodstuff and location. And it means that there is an awful lot to consider when tackling it. So food contact materials can, of course, contain intentionally added substances, IAS, such as things like polymer additives or additives from adhesives, varnishes, printing inks, and residual monomers and catalysts. I think what is becoming increasingly important in the analysis of food contact materials is the concern around non-intentionally added substances. And these are essentially co-products of unintentional degradation processes of things like polymers and additives. And the idea that impurities from raw materials might form new compounds and other contaminants that could enter into foodstuffs. So those are areas of increasing risk and concern, and of course of high importance for analytical testing around the world. Historically, and even going into now, there are ultimately two main ways of assessing and measuring food contact material migration and the risk posed to foodstuffs. In terms of overall migration limits, or OMLs, that means the total amount of non-volatile materials that migrate into food from the given food contact material. Even more specific is, of course, is the specific migration limit. So this is the amount of one specific substance that will migrate into food from the given food contact materials. These specific migration limits are established by EFSA on the basis of toxicity data surrounding each specific substance. So in terms of the specific migration limits, these are ultimately the maximum concentration of contaminants permitted in the simulant or in a food under standardized testing conditions. To understand these limits, the EU has legislative framework has extensive lists of SMLs for things like plastics, and those have been set for hundreds of different substances related to that. And the resultant work of our knowledge around plastics as food contact materials is something that we're going to dive into in just a moment. SMLs, or specific migration limits, are often based around a toxicological assessment, extrapolating simulant concentrations using worst case assumptions. And that's really to provide assurance that the acceptable daily intake would not be exceeded if migration occurred into food. So this idea of toxicity levels being harmful to the human population, of course, is based on accumulation sometimes. And I think the main concern with food contact materials, especially as the whole category evolves, is that those accumulation levels may be out of control or not fully understood. And that's one of the key reasons why testing has to be so accurate and reliable in this area. So historically, interest has focused more upon the migration of intentionally added substances, the things that we know about in terms of things like the residual monomers and functional additives from things like plastic, silicon, and rubber. Those are well established, well understood, and have been a major concern for a large amount of time. However, what we're starting to see, as mentioned, is this focus on non-intentionally added substances. And that is, at least in part, associated with this drive towards sustainability and therefore the rapid development of things like recycled packaging materials, and that's cardboards and papers. And that product development that has occurred, and then really trying to understand what does that mean for the food substances that these come into contact with, is a large focus for the industry at the moment, and indeed of a lot of analytical testing related to that. I think it's worth saying that in the next few years, it's highly likely that the use of things like cellulose and starch-based materials will come into play, as well as what we're starting to see more recently known as active packaging that is designed to extend food shelf life. And the uses of those materials is likely to increase exponentially, and therefore the testing and the detailed understanding of those materials is likely to follow suit. Ultimately, it goes without saying, really, that the balance of the risk and benefit of introducing these materials needs to be assessed before finalizing those uses. And possibly the most dynamic part of the food contact materials investigation that goes on in laboratories and worldwide is driven by the consumer agenda. And I think, okay, a lot of our scientific analysis around the world, and certainly a lot of the laboratories that we support with proficiency testing are responding to consumer need and safety, and that might be a given, but rarely is there an area quite so clearly driven by a consumer agenda as food contact materials. And that's partly because of this increasing awareness of the need to reduce plastic packaging and reduce food waste. And you're starting to see, and it won't have escaped anybody's attention, the efforts made by the industry to reduce those items and redevelop the concept of food packaging, improving recycling, and what that really means is new novel materials entering the marketplace and entering common usage, a key part of what we need to work on and what we need to support laboratory testing. So in certain areas, there has been a real awareness raised around the potential risks from certain packaging materials, largely related to the world of plastics. One of those materials that everyone will know at least something about is bisphenol A, otherwise known as BPA. Some people may recall seeing BPA-free used extensively as a mark of safety and quality throughout multiple different industries, and that can include consumer goods, both durable and consumable. We have a storm going overhead, so please excuse any thunder that you may hear. However, novel materials and packaging alternatives that are being introduced largely to displace things like BPA may introduce new contaminant hazards, and that's something that is really a key driver for food contact materials, and it's something that I think everyone needs to be at least mindful of and in some ways concerned about. So a key part of testing will be the understanding of these novel materials. So it is therefore essential that evidence-based assessments are made, but those assessments need to be made with the view of risk and benefit balances in mind. So how those are managed becomes the responsibilities of manufacturers, testing laboratories, anyone else really involved in the food supply chain, from farm to fork, as we said. So the risk and the control of the risk of chemical contaminants in food is relatively conservative in general. So the fact that those risk assessments are so conservative needs to be constantly addressed and constantly balanced, especially around these novel foods. So understanding and quantifying the risk coming from various different types of contaminants in food contact materials becomes a critical part of testing, not just to meet food safety needs, but also to meet the rising demands coming from the consumer acknowledgement and understanding of this area. So, okay, we've established the fact that food contact materials are changing, they're important, and they're vital. One of the best places to start is taking a look at the story of bisphenol A, or BPA, and what does it tell us about the future. So to take us through that story, it's my great pleasure to introduce Valerie Bardin. So Valerie, over to you, and thank you.
Thank you, James. So yeah, as you mentioned, James, I'm pretty sure that most of you have heard of bisphenol A, also called BPA, and BPA is certainly a very good example to illustrate the progressive awareness of the risk associated to materials that have been used for decades, and also the complexity to switch to alternatives. So a few words about BPA. So BPA was first synthesized in 1891, so over 100 years ago, and its estrogenic activity was discovered in 1936. Since the 50s, BPA has been produced in very large volumes, and it was mainly used to produce polycarbonate plastics, epoxy resins, and can be found in almost everything, including flooring adhesives to drinking water pipelines. So BPA has two principal food contact uses. First, it can be used as a protective epoxy resin to coat the inside of cans. It's also used to make a compound called bisphenol A diglycidyl ether, abbreviated as BADG, and BADG was until recently the base material of almost all canning epoxy resins. So such resins will no doubt contain some residual BPA. BPA is also used to produce plastic containers, kitchenware, and bottles. So BPA-based polycarbonate is very, very durable. It's also the most common color developer in thermal paper. So basically the cash receipts, and the use for cash receipts is actually phased out in Europe now. For all those reasons, BPA rapidly became one of the most produced and used chemicals worldwide, even though it was recognized as a synthetic estrogen. So what sort of concerns may arise from BPA? The toxicology of the BPA is well studied. High-dose animal studies have shown some effects, including reproductive toxicology, kidney damage, neurological, and also immune damage. So BPA was originally developed as an oestrogenic drug rather than a plastic feedstock. However, it was never used for commercial medical purpose, and the inherent estrogenic effect were of use, and there is also some evidence of adverse reproductive effects in humans at high doses. BPA residues and metabolites are detected in human urine around the world. There is, however, some disagreement on the significance of the different exposure sources. For the most exposed population, and typically this means the cashiers, it is uncontentious that the skin absorption from the thermal paper is far more significant than the ingestion from food. For the other population, there is disagreement whether the food ingestion is a significant exposure route relative to the other sources. The main food source of BPA is migration from epoxy resins, typically canned foods, but it can also migrate from plastic packaging, containers, and wraps. So the degree of BPA migration into canned food depends on many factors, including sterilizing conditions, the shelf life, and the storage conditions as well, and of course, very much it depends on the nature of the food and the difference of pH, water content, fat, sugar, salt contents have significant effects on the migration of BPA. So this makes the extrapolation of the exposure assessment using simulants very uncertain. And there is also limited data on the BPA levels in food compared to tests using simulants. So this is one of the limits in testing. So a bit of history of BPA now. In the 1700s and 80s, BPA was lauded as the answer to many food contact material problems. However, after repeated media reports of the BPA's estrogenic and endocrine disrupting properties, there was a rapid and very much consumer-driven switch to plastic that were marketed as BPA-free, at least in, let's say, the most developed markets. Many regulators placed some precautionary bans on BPA, especially in baby food contact material, and that's really cemented the perception in the consumer minds that BPA could pose a health risk. However, this does not preclude the use of other bisphenol-based plastics such as bisphenol S as a substitute. The food cans almost universally still used BPA-based epoxy resin coatings prior to the French BPA ban in 2015. So this ban has several effects. One of them was that it really decimated the French canning industry, but this unilateral ban also sent some shockwaves around the world supply chain. And because it is not economically viable for multinational food companies to produce bespoke cans in France or for France, there was a rapid drive for replacement coatings that could be marketed globally. So alpha resins based on other bisphenol are a short-term fix. The canning industry is acutely aware that they are likely to come under equivalent consumer and regulatory pressure in the future, and they are working on coatings that will have some long-term acceptability. If we look at the regulation around the world for the use of BPA, there are differences depending on the countries or areas. In the European Union, there is new single migration limit for the BPA, which is 0.05 milligram per kilogram of food. But BPA is just banned in infant bottles and saucers. No migration of BPA shall be permitted from varnishes or coatings applied to materials and articles that are specifically intended to come into contact with infant formula, baby food, and any food that is for medical purpose. So there is also a limit on the amount of BPA that is allowed to leak out of toys for children, children up to the age of 3, and also in any toys that are intended to be placed in a child's mouth. The migration limit has been set as 0.04 milligram per liter for toys. In France, the regulation is even more strict because BPA is just banned in all food contact materials. In the US, BPA is banned as a coating in baby bottles and also in infant formula cans. And there are also some more state-specific controls, particularly in the foods for young children. In China, the single migration limit is set as 0.6 milligram per kilo, so 12 times higher than the EU. So due to its toxicity to reproduction and its endocrine disrupting properties, BPA is on the candidate list of substances for authorization under the REACH regulation. The REACH regulation is a regulation of the European Union, and it was adopted to improve the protection of human health and the environment also from the risk that can be posed by chemicals. So REACH stands for Registration, Evaluation, Authorization, and Restriction of Chemicals. So for all the substances that are on this list, consumer can ask the supplier of any product whether it contains BPA in a concentration above 0.1%. If it's the case, the supplier will need to provide this information within 40 days of the request, as well as sufficient information to allow the safe use of the product by the consumers. So with the recognition of BPA as an endocrine disruptor and the increasing regulation, the industry really started to use alternative compounds, but finding a BPA replacement, and especially a good replacement, is not easy. Today, bisphenol S, so abbreviated as BPS, and bisphenol F, BPF, are quite popular alternatives, and the current regulations are a lot less comprehensive than those governing the use of BPA. However, due to their chemical structures that are very similar to BPA, we can expect some BPA-like effects. So from a consumer perspective, the label BPA-free does not guarantee that the product is safe from potential toxicity risks. So a few words about bisphenol S. So it has been introduced into the industry as a, well, supposedly safer alternative to bisphenol A. BPS was primarily used in polymer production and thermal paper as a substitute of BPA. And of course, because it's more recent than BPA, there has been less study. So the investigation has remained quite limited compared to BPA. However, several studies revealed that BPS is often found in indoor environments, surface water, some food items, and even in the human body, for instance, in urine or even breast milk. So some additional investigation on the potential risk of BPS to humans and its mechanism of toxicity should be conducted to better understand and control the risk of such new chemicals. In the meantime, in Europe, BPS is authorized to be used as a monomer in plastic food contact material with a specific migration limit of 0.05 milligram per kilo of food, just like BPA. So today there is obviously a lot of consumer pressure and also some growing awareness of the potential risk associated to food contact materials and the risk they are putting to the consumer, which also means in the end some increasing pressure to the industry and to laboratories. So laboratories have to work very hard to protect consumers and the global population, and the deployment of effective quality and risk management strategies is crucial. So these strategies are very often dictated by the ISO 17025 accreditation, which includes the use of reference materials and inter-laboratory comparison, such as proficiency testing. So I'm now passing over to Savas to talk about the key driver for food contact material testing, including the regulation and consumer awareness. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. So as James mentioned in the previous slides, there is a strong pressure from consumers to better consider the risks, known or unknown, linked to food contact materials. And many organizations out there like Safe, Characterized, or Zero Waste Europe have emerged, and they ask for more protective and harmonized legislation based on the latest scientific findings. These organizations, they emphasize issues around lack of regulations for example, for printing inks and adhesives, that the regulations focus on intentionally added substances, while non-intentionally added substances are the majority of compounds migrating. And also the growing, they focus on the recycled plastics, and that there is a growing concern due to harmful chemicals during the recycling processes. And it is also difficult to control the recycled plastics safety at the moment. So there are almost 12,000 distinct chemicals that may be used in the manufacture of food contact materials. So there are many, not to say too many. Many of these chemicals are intentionally used in the manufacture of food contact articles, and obviously not all of them are tested for hazard properties. If many non-intentionally added substances have been detected by modern analytical methods, many are still unknown and unidentified. And some organizations have joined hands, like the Health and Environment Alliance, Zero Waste Europe, and the European Consumer Organization, and Chemtrust, to create some infographics like the one you can see in the slide, about food contact materials safety, myths and truths around these materials. So new containers and kitchenware arrive on the market of food contact materials, and articles containing ground bamboo or other similar additives like corn flour are gaining popularity. But the majority of bamboo kitchenware is made of multiple bamboo strips, different types. Melamine resin is sometimes used to make cookware stronger. So ground bamboo kitchenware are frequently found not to be compliant with the regulation because of presence of substances not listed in the safe list, misleading labeling, the risk of exceeding specific migration limit of formaldehyde and melamine as well. Then between 2019 and May 2021, there were 77 notifications about food contact materials containing bamboo fibers on the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed, RASF, of the European Commission. And the non-compliances that were notified mostly related to the unauthorized use of bamboo additive or mislabeling of products. Several European Union member state authorities have issued announcements or raised concerns on the use of food contact plastics containing natural materials like bamboo or materials that are not included in the Union list. Some examples are Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Finland, Ireland, and Spain. But following the continued placing on the market of such plastics, the European Commission, the EU member states, and members of the European Food Fraud Network have agreed on the 6th of May 2021 to launch a European Union-wide enforcement action plan. So in terms of regulations, Regulation 1935 of 2004 provides a harmonized legal framework in the EU. It sets out general principles of safety and inertness for all food contact materials. So the principles set out in the regulation require that the materials do not release constituents into food at levels harmful to human health, or they do not change food composition, taste, or odor in an acceptable way. And the most comprehensive specific measure is Regulation 10 of 2010 and 11, on plastic materials and articles. And the overall and specific migration limits are specifically stated in this regulation. And we also added a link here. It's a useful resource about food contact materials documents library on the European Commission website. So together with bisphenol A and bisphenol S samples included in the food contact materials proficiency testing scheme that Valerie mentioned in the previous slides, phthalates are also included in food contact material scheme. They can readily migrate into fatty foods because they are lipid soluble. The below were identified by the European Chemicals Agency as substances of very high concern due to endocrine disrupting properties. This is DEHP, and the SML is specifically stated in the regulation, BBP and DBP. Next slide, please. Also, lead and cadmium can migrate from ceramics, and exposure to lead and cadmium released from ceramics and glassware intended to come into contact with food can be significant. So cadmium has a specific migration limit of 0.1 milligrams per liter for any ceramic cookingware, and lead 1.5. And obviously for any ceramic article to be satisfying the legislative requirements, the concentration of both elements, heavy metals, must not exceed the maximum limits provided. Primary aromatic amines is another group of compounds that may migrate from food contact materials, also as degradation products and impurities. They are a very large family of compounds. Some of them are more problematic than others. They are considered carcinogens, and others are suspected carcinogens. Toluene diamine is an azocolorant and is included in our sample for primary aromatic amines. 4,4-methylene dianiline is another azocolorant. Those two are the most problematic as they are described in the regulation due to health properties. And also aniline is another one that is included in the primary aromatic amine sample. So these regulations are, as James mentioned, are changing. The 15th amendment to the regulation of number 10 of 2011 was officially published in September 2020 and has a transition period of 2 years. And based on scientific assessments by EFSA, amendments were proposed, mostly around primary aromatic amines, just because the methods that are currently being used are becoming better and better, so the detection limit is becoming lower, and therefore the detection limit in the regulation can change. So from 0.01 milligram per kilogram of food or food stimulant went down to 0.002 milligrams per kilogram. And the most problematic primary aromatic amines are listed in REACH regulation entry 43 under the isocolorants entry specifically. Obviously, these advances in analytical capabilities and validating new methods or developing new methods, participation in proficiency testing is very important and vital. So a few words about the PFAS, parent polyfluoroalkyl substances. There is a lot of discussion around PFAS, both in the European Union, in the United States, in Japan, and other countries. Food can become contaminated through contaminated soil and water used to grow food, accumulation of these substances in animals via feed and water, and also through food packaging containing PFAS. Mostly, for example, food packaging used for microwaving popcorn is one example, or other processing equipment that contains PFAS. So the question is the human exposure contribution of PFAS from packaging small compared with other sources? That is what is suggested, that it's small. But EFSA has set a new safety threshold for the main PFAS compounds. Also, the European Green Deal includes a new chemical strategy for sustainability, and there is a list of actions to address PFAS pollution in general. Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark are working on a REACH restriction proposal to limit the risks to the environment and human health. And also in the United States, the Food and Drug Administration, they are working on reviewing the scientific information on the authorized uses of food contact substances. And they are, the FDA are also working on methods used to test PFAS in food. For example, they published an LCMSMS method for the determination of 16 per and polyfluoroalkyl substances in food. And let's talk about more specifically about our contact PT scheme. So the samples provided under AXIO contact packaging and food contact materials proficiency testing scheme. You can see the samples in the table below. So bisphenols, primary aromatic amines, heavy metals, phthalates, and total content of bisphenol A in plastic. And specifically about bisphenol A in plastic, the total content, we received some results about total content of bisphenol A in plastic. The results were variable, possibly demonstrating challenges in BPA testing. The majority of participants used LCMSMS method to report the results, and the homogeneity of the sample was tested and before dispatch and met the acceptance criteria. As you can see, the results were variable. We don't have information about the extraction solvent or the extraction method used for each of the results reported. Some of the participants may have reported bisphenol A migrated in a simulant rather than the dissolution of the polymer in a solvent and then measuring the total content. So some of the low results might be linked to that. But as I said, this is some preliminary data that we have, and extraction differences can always lead to questionable testing results, and participation in proficiency testing can help to establish troubleshooting needs to improve the methods or validate new methods for this kind of testing. And I pass on to James about the role.
Thanks, Savas. Thanks, Savas. I think it's all very interesting. I think the one key thing that we can take away from that is that the world of food contact materials, both in terms of testing methods, but also in terms of the regulatory environment, is changing at a rapid pace. And as Savas mentioned at the end there, the introduction of things like specific methods or any kind of new analysis being carried out in laboratories can be well supported by any major quality control systems that you may have, but that can definitely include proficiency testing. One of the things that I wanted to highlight is our determination to stay close to the latest developments in this area. And so the idea being that proficiency testing becomes something that you can call upon, not just when you are fully established in your testing routines in the laboratory, but also as you are developing and defining your processes and your methods specifically around testing food contact materials. I wanted to highlight here the opportunity we have to support you with more than just samples. So yes, you can work with us and we can provide you with great quality proficiency testing samples around a number of different potential contaminants from food contact materials. But we can also support you with some of the latest insights and our own investigations into this area. So it might be obvious, but we investigate these areas so that we can better understand how to support laboratories around the world. So we have a number of different ways of looking into this, and a large part of that is engaging with our customers and our partners around the world. So we need to know from you, what is it that you're facing? What are the challenges that you're encountering? And in that way, we can work hard to make sure that we're supporting you from the very start. As well as that, we also spend time looking at the various different industries and the regulations and the management bodies that may have an impact on industries such as food contact materials. We tend to try and sum all that up in our industry insights features on our website. So the latest one that we've put up is called How Sustainable Quality Processes Can Secure a Sustainable Future. And the reason we've established that topic is because that, as we mentioned earlier, those introductions of novel materials and food contact materials are really leading to the latest developments in testing around food contact materials. So please do go have a read at our website, lgcstandards.com/AXIO. I think it's well worth 5 minutes of anyone's time to get a little bit more of the latest insight. And of course, through that, there's an opportunity to ask us more questions. A quick word on proficiency testing. Many of you may already be aware, but if not, now is a great time to understand that proficiency testing is a critical tool in ensuring laboratory performance is consistent and that the measurements made in that laboratory are accurate and reliable. You may also know that proficiency testing is specified in ISO IEC 17025 as a key external quality assessment tool. And it is designed to support really any type of laboratory looking to analyze, it says vegan food products here, but any food products in a variety of different ways. This is an opportunity to fulfill accreditation requirements, to demonstrate your competency to customers and regulatory bodies, whether it's at auditing time or a different time. It gives you a chance to compare your results with laboratories all around the world. So there may be different international regulations dictating these things, but the principles behind the testing and the end goal is often the same. And PT is a really great way of connecting with a much wider set of peers than you may have access to otherwise, and really understand how your testing is fitting into a global context. We've mentioned that the approach to food contact materials testing and analysis is based on a largely risk assessment type model. So PT again is a great way of managing risk through the early warnings around potential problems that may be faced. You can verify methods and instrumentation and make sure anything new you're introducing to the lab is operating as you want it to, but also to make sure that your standards are maintaining a consistent level of performance. And finally, there is also a way that you can use proficiency testing to educate and train staff. You know, it's a really good way of working with a larger group to ensure that everybody is operating in a consistent way, but also to introduce any potential new staff into the ways of analysing specific samples. A PT is always a great place for people to put their analytical capabilities to the test and ensure consistency. We ourselves are AXIO proficiency testing. We are part of the LGC wider family. Many of you may well be aware of all the different things that LGC contributes to the scientific community. But in particular, we have been leading the direction of proficiency testing for over 40 years. And we talk about bringing our technical expertise and influence to drive the future of quality assurance. And what we mean by that is that we ensure that all of the people that are leading the way in developing our proficiency testing schemes, our samples, our data collection, our reporting, of course, is so important. All of these people play a really key role in committees and organizations and bodies around the world that are really pushing proficiency testing forward and making sure that it maintains pace with all the sectors that it serves so well. We design our schemes to meet your laboratory's future needs, and that's what I mean about staying close to the latest developments and hearing about your needs and requirements directly. Ultimately, it's having those PT samples at your disposal that allows you to consistently deliver a quality product or meet sector-specific standards, or of course achieve those accreditations that are so popular, particularly in this space around ISO IEC 17025. We always say that great results are born out of confidence, and we genuinely believe that by working with us, you can have the assurance that your decision-making is informed, reliable, and effective. We are the safety net for your testing and, more importantly, your measurement results. And we are here to support you, and that is our only goal as a proficiency testing provider. I'd like to invite you to discover more about AXIO at lgcstandards.com/AXIO. You can contact us in a variety of different ways. If you visit our website and go on the contact us page, you can find the details of your local offices should you wish to do so. Similarly, you can email us at axio@lgcgroup.com, and we will be able to ensure that your inquiry reaches the right people to support your needs. And then finally, please do join us in our communities online. Whether you're aware or not, our community, especially on LinkedIn, but also on Twitter, is quite a dynamic place to be. We put quite a lot of different content and information out there. We share the details of the various people that are behind your samples, but also it's where we want to hear from our partners and friends around the world to tell us what we should be doing next. I think that's a pretty critical component of what we do. Is we can meet pretty much any need defined to us, but we just need to understand what those needs are. So please do talk to us, tell us what you're looking for, and we'll do everything we can to explore that further. The world of LGC does go beyond AXIO proficiency testing, and so I just wanted to quickly highlight our partners amongst the LGC family, and that includes BRCGS, who have a global standard for packaging materials. They also have global standards in many different areas, including food safety as the main one. So please do take a look at brcgs.com to discover more, because their standards are designed to protect the consumer by providing a common basis for the certification of companies supplying packaging to food producers. So a pretty critical area here, and what they do is they provide a really strong framework for protecting the consumers, especially in the world of packaging and therefore food contact materials as that part of the supply chain. So please do take a look at their website. Also, I'd like to highlight Dr. Aaron Stauffer. So Dr. Aaron Stauffer is a leading global provider of reference materials, particularly for food and environment, but they have a really dynamic and diverse and up-to-date range of food contact material reference materials. So they, of course, are designed to support laboratories in analytical testing of all types. I would say from experience that partnering the really effective use of food contact material reference materials with a complementary PT scheme essentially will give you a real strong bedrock of quality control. So if you're not doing so already, please do take a look at Dr. Ehrenstorfer online, and they can be found on our website, lgcstandards.com/Dr. Ehrenstorfer. And of course, you can just go to lgcstandards.com and use the search to find whatever you need to. And it's a great way of exploring all the options available to you. So that brings me to the end of our presentation. So we do have just a couple of minutes for questions. So I will just quickly have a look to see if we've got any. And of course, like I said, if you have any questions, please type it in the questions function on GoToWebinar, and we will address what we can. Similarly, should anything come to you following this webinar, then please contact us directly. We would love to help. Okay, so we have one question here around bamboo and migrating compounds. So I think this is probably because we've specifically mentioned the unknowns that are surrounding some of the novel materials that are hitting the market, such as bamboo. So I think possibly one for, well, definitely one for Savas or Valerie. Do you have any immediate plans to add a sample for bamboo and migrating compounds into the AXIO portfolio? Is this one for you, Savas, or?
Yeah, I can answer this. I mean, I cannot say that we have any immediate plans, but if we identify a need for testing this material, obviously, but it looks like there is a need at the moment, we are happy to consider a sample for bamboo.
Okay, I think, yeah, bamboo is one of those things that I have children, and you see bamboo-based products increasingly for children to have it on the dinner table and things. So I think it's definitely an area of great interest. And I think Valerie's BPA story, particularly, if those of you may recall, that one of the key trigger points in that story was the impact on children, and I think that's quite often what moves an area of scientific concern into the public agenda. So definitely. I think we may hear more about that, right? So definitely an interesting area. So should anyone be looking at that or have any interest in that, please reach out to us. We're keen to understand your needs, I think. So that amongst others. And just one other question. Do you have any plans to add an overall migration sample?
Yes, we do have plans. So we're working together with our colleagues in other territories, specifically in China, to provide a sample for overall migration, hopefully in the near future.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so I think that does bring us to the end of the questions, but just to kind of summarize there, yeah, the one thing I know about this area, and I've spent a bit of time on this on reference materials as well as on proficiency testing, and the changes that seem to impact the market are happening all the time. And the one thing we say about AXIO, of course, is the fact that we change with the industry, we change with the demands. So again, it's exciting to see what's coming next. Okay, in that case, we are pretty much out of time. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And I hope you found this useful. It's been a little voyage through some food contact materials history, as well as looking to the future. Should you want to connect with us in any way, please do so on our website or on social media. And then finally, following this webinar, you'll receive an opportunity to download the video should you want to watch it back or share it further. But similarly, you'll also hear from us asking a few questions about the webinar, what you want to see next. So please let us know your thoughts, your feelings, and what you're interested in, and we'll make sure that we return with even more information and content for you to enjoy and learn from. Thank you everyone for your time, and have a great day and week and month. Take care everybody, and thank you to Valerie and Salas.